The video you are about to watch is uneventful, mathematical, and harmless. To most, hearing those 3 words would be enough to turn them away and find something else to entertain them. If you think this video is about ruling which adaptation is better, you'd be incorrect. Perhaps it's about screaming about which one the video creator didn't like and how they didn't feel like it was faithful to the source material. No, this isn't one of those either. Perhaps it's a video talking about how one element has certain things that are better than the other, and why they can't hold a candle to the other. Alas, this isn't that video either. There are many videos on the web that you can watch that will help you fill those needs. This video is for those of you who wish to hear a viewpoint on adaptations that isn't commonly heard, presenting you with examples that you may not have thought of or really ever took into consideration. If this is the video you were looking for in the vast sea of consumable content, then you've come to the right place. My name is EPZ379, and I'm here to tell you why adaptations are always a miss. Adapting stories that were originally literature is something that is incredibly tricky. When things are cut, removed, replaced, reimagined from the literature into a visual medium, it's most likely due to because there's some sort of budgetary restrictions or time limitations that would cause the elements to be struck from the narrative that's being told. There have been a couple of channels in recent times that have actually tackled the idea of making adaptations. One that I recently watched was from PBS Digital Studios entitled When the Book is Better Than the Movie. I'll have it in the description below so you can watch it for yourself. It's a very thoughtful watch that I enjoyed a lot. Today, I want to dive into an idea that I've been saying to people for years. The idea that a perfect adaptation of any piece of literature is improbable. Now, most people would interpret this as some piece of negativity towards TV shows and films that are based off of or adapted from series of books or even standalone novels. It's understandable that someone with a sense of writing knows that a pure adaptation of literature is hard to do because the little details get lost along the way when making a show or a film, but I believe it's more than just the details. For this video, I'll be using a collection of books that have actually been made into both a feature film as well as a television show. The books in question are Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events, written by author Daniel Handler, which were published from 1999 to 2006. The feature film was released in 2004 by Paramount and Nickelodeon Movies and was based off of the first 3 books in the series, being The Bad Beginning, The Reptile Room, and The Wide Window. The television show is produced by Netflix. The first season premiered in January of 2017, while its second season premiered in March of 2018. The Netflix show gives 2 50-minute-long episodes for every book in the series. With that comparison on its own, you can see how the show and film have their own ways of telling the story that's presented in the original novels. For those unaware of the plot of A Series of Unfortunate Events, here is a brief synopsis. When a mysterious fire kills their parents, the Baudelaire children are placed into the care of their estranged distant relative Count Olaf, a devious actor who is determined to claim the family's fortune for himself. Following Olaf's failed attempts and plots being exposed, the Baudelaire children are sent to different distant relatives and embark on adventures that elude Olaf and uncover the mystery behind the secret society from their parents' past. Very macabre in its presentation, A Series of Unfortunate Events is one that is surrounded by a persistent melancholy vibe that starts from the very first page and continues throughout the entirety of the narrative. It's interesting to imagine how one would take the story and attempt to recreate the vibe on the big or small screen. With the film, it was about capturing the heart of the story. While the events in the film were still unfortunate, its counterbalance with humor was greatly elaborated upon in this take on the story. Most people would take into account that this may be the energy given off by Jim Carrey as Count Olaf, which is understandable. Carrey's version of Olaf is less on the sinister side and more on the wacky wannabe actor, whose maliciousness is just under the surface that can be called forth at a moment's notice. But the film has more than just Carrey's performance. This is a star-studded cast, as the supporting characters were all incredibly well put together, and that all of them stand tall on their own. The film also has a higher budget than any other form of visual medium, especially when compared to television. So the visual design of the sets, makeup, dress, props, and effects are all very well put together and match what the film was going for. However, with the budget for the actors, the sets, the props, and the effects, there comes a different kind of price to to pay. A film adaptation might have the right budget to make the visual style comparable to the story and the ideas, but films have an incredibly strict time frame for how long the film can actually be. Most of the time, film adaptations are based on books. The directors and the production houses usually stick to the method of one book equals one movie. Sometimes this works well, and sometimes they run into complications. The film version of A Series of Unfortunate Events had 95 minutes to tell the story of the bad beginning, the reptile room, and the wide window, all of which have a combined total of 566 pages. Now, a side note. For anyone looking up information about this movie, or perhaps you just knew this off the top of your head for some reason, I know that technically on paper it reads that the movie runs for 108 minutes. However, if you remove the introduction sequence of production houses and titles, as well as the Littlest Elf sequence at the very beginning, as well as remove the end credit sequence, you are left with a story that runs for about 95 minutes. Now, for the books, they're not terribly long independently, but combining the stories together means you run the risk of not being able to highlight on what needs to be told. Simple math shows that on a page-to-screen ratio, that means for every minute of the film, it would have to span 5 pages of content from the novels. As someone who's written and studied screenwriting, I can tell you that this is, in fact, an improbable task, borderline impossible, meaning that large parts of the stories are either going to have to be cut from the film, or, as was the case of this film, the story elements are going to be rushed through incredibly quickly. This was a case of, we need to get everything into the film, rather than how can we restructure it so that all 3 stories can fit together while keeping the theme of the novels. The film adaptation has a couple of times where it does reimagine, or at least attempt to restructure ideas to fit a cinematic setting. In the grand scheme of things, it was not really restructuring or rewriting or even reimagining, and it was more about just rearranging chronological events that happened in the book series. The example here is the fact that half of the bad beginning storyline happens for the first 29 minutes of the film, is then put on hold as the story shifts to the reptile room for 19 minutes, then to the wide window for 26 minutes, and then returns to tell the second half of the bad beginning for the last 21 minutes of the movie. Doing the math shows that 53% of the movie is dedicated to the bad beginning, 20% is in the reptile room, and 26% is given to the wide window. This is why the film feels very rushed at parts of the story. It literally was rushed through. How directors can restructure a story, and how screenwriters can reimagine and rethink how things are done is remarkable. There are a couple of examples that people usually go to in this particular category, and for this one I'll use one that is most commonly thought of, being the 1982 film Blade Runner, from Hampton Fancher and David Peoples, and the literature counterpart from 1968, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, by author Philip K. Dick. Here's an example of a movie being so radically different from the book, it's kind of insane. Blade Runner is an outstanding piece of cinematic history. Most people know it, most people have seen it, and it even went on to get a very successful sequel many years later. Then you have Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. As somebody who's read the book, I can tell you right now, it is a very, very, very weird book. Honestly, you kind of need to take a microscope to the story of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep to see how it ties into the narrative of Blade Runner. But this is something that actually should be more oftenly done when it comes to cinematic adaptations of literature. Something that pays homage to the original source material but crafts it into something new. It's used in the original story to mold something that either set in the same universe as the story that we imagined from the literature, or it reimagines how the events could have been done in a different way. Sometimes you get people who get a little carried away with trying to make something unique while also kind of taking SparkNote versions from the original source material. Nope, no, I already did a video on you. I already did. No, go away. I'm not thinking about you anymore. Go away. Go watch yourself. Go away. Oh, God. Sucker just keeps coming back to haunt me, doesn't it? While the Nickelodeon movie version has visually pleasing elements and a really good cast, the film ran into its most potent issue when it set on telling all 3 of the stories in one sitting, resulting in a movie that was very rushed because it speeds through elements of the story while taking too much time to linger on things that narratively shouldn't last as long. Now let's look at the Netflix series. Every single book is going to be tackled across all 3 seasons, each book getting 2 50-minute long episodes to introduce elements from the book, establish what characters are who, and steady the narrative foundation of this world. You're able to retain most, if not all, of the details seen in the novels, meaning that the page-to-screen ratio is going to be far more accurate when compared to any film adaptation. Even the cast of the Netflix show is very well put together, with Neil Patrick Harris playing Olaf being a perfect choice throughout. However, there's going to be a problem with making any literature into a television series that films don't have, the budget being incomparable. The film had a $140 million budget, and since the film covered the first 3 books in the series, that means that from every book to script translation had a budget of $46.6 million per book. According to IndieWire, the budget of the first season of the Netflix show roughly was $56 million, which covered 4 books from the series, which means that each book to script translation for the Netflix series was around $7 million for every part, which means that every book had the budget of $14 million to produce. Look at these numbers. The Netflix show had a third of the budget than the film did just to tell the story of one novel. The season of the Netflix show that told The Bad Beginning, The Reptile Room, The Wide Window, and The Miserable Mill had an estimated budget of $56 million across 8 episodes. If the films used the exact same event with 2 more films telling the next couple of books in the series, that means that the movies would have cost roughly $606 million to cover all 13 books in the series. This number is based on how much it could have been based on how much it took just to tell the story of one novel. Additionally, making these books into a television series also means that at certain points in time, the story tends to drag a little, and sometimes it loses its pacing. While it's definitely handled a lot better in the second season, this is a point of the matter that the element is always going to be there. It's an inescapable ability to accidentally take too much time to tell the story that can lead to episodes feeling rather dry and slow compared to others. And this, viewer, is why adaptations will never be perfect across any form of literature that will ever get translated. If you want the budget of a film, you have to sacrifice the length of the medium, and either have to cut stuff out or rush through important details. If you want the length of a television series, you have to sacrifice the budget, and risk things not looking as polished, or perhaps having random spikes of low progression within the narrative. You keep the budget, you strike the length. You keep the length, you strike the budget. It's a classic catch-22 scenario. You can't have a television series with a film budget, and you can't have a film that is the length of a television series. This is the case with any novel series being converted into any other visual medium. You have to sacrifice one or the other. You'll never really have the true ability to tell the story of the books in a visual medium without sacrificing either the length or the budget. That's just how this industry works. Even with Netflix shows having a higher sense of budget, they're never going to be comparable to that which is seen in film production. The only network that even comes remotely close is HBO, and even then they have to cut extreme corners to allow certain elements to be both maintained as length as well as budget. Something is always going to be struck. And as unfortunate as that is, this is actually supposedly a good thing. Allow me to explain. I mentioned it a little earlier in the episode, and I'll highlight upon it now. Film adaptation should never be about recreating the books one-to-one. Instead, about reworking the story of the novels in a different viewpoint and angle of storytelling. For example, if the film was going to be about the first 3 books, it shouldn't have tried to do a weird switcheroo in terms of its order. If I was going to write this, I would dissect all 3 books and see how you could splice them together, while keeping the narrative intact while crafting something new, in a different way to interpret the story, mind you. For example, if the first half of the story would revolve around the plot of The Bad Beginning and Count Olaf's plan to stage a play to wed Violet to gain the fortune. The second half of the movie could be dedicated to both the Reptile Room as well as the Wide Window. It could be restructured around the idea that both Uncle Montgomery and Aunt Josephine have joint custody over the Baudelaire children. The events of the book are still kept in play, but they're restructured to happen simultaneously. Not only would this highlight on the resourcefulness of Count Olaf to switch characters, but it also shows how the Baudelaires handle themselves in a multitude of different situations and tasks that they find themselves in. By having the events of the Reptile Room and Wide Window happen at the same time, or at least very close to one another, you don't risk losing much information of the events that were kept in the books to this translation, versus if they were kept separately. The climax of the film could revolve around them finding clues about VFD and how their parents could be connected to recent events, only to discover that Uncle Montgomery and Aunt Josephine have both died under mysterious circumstances, and they have to figure out how Olaf is connected and how they can prove that he is the culprit. How one could write this is completely different from writer to writer, and while I have my own ideas, perhaps that's a discussion for another day. Allow me to bring another example of book-to-screen adaptations being strangely haphazard. The example that I'll use for this one would be the Harry Potter books. Most people know that a lot of the smaller details from the books were cut out for the film's sake, and at some point bits of the narrative were completely restructured or rewritten to make them more streamlined, so that the writers and director would not have to dedicate time to explain where these elements came from. An interesting hypothetical situation for a writing exercise can be presented to you this way. If you were going to take the Harry Potter series, and instead of them being a series of films, how would you rewrite them to be a television series? Most people think that this is a silly question, but it is a thing that you can do whether you're trying to practice your writing. How would you take something like the Harry Potter idea and translate and restructure them to be a running television series? Perhaps it runs for 7 seasons, each book getting its own season to cement details of the wizarding world and all of the history and lore that were invented by J.K. Rowling. How would you take the chapters, all of the story elements that are present in the books, and translate them into a way that work for a standardized television series? These are all really important questions that need to be asked when you're making an adaptation of any form of literature. You also have to keep in mind that if you are adapting something of literature into a television show, you can't be too rambunctious with the amount of things that you're going to try to squeeze in. Remember, the likelihood of you having a giant budget to pull off all the spectacular things seen in these books are very low. With something like Harry Potter, it's trickier to figure out what will guide the adaptation. Do you strike the visual effects from the budget to make the series longer, to tackle large chunks of development and history? Or do you keep the visual effects budget and make the spells and creatures look more magical but lose the ability to incorporate all the story points and lore? As both adaptations of a series of unfortunate events proves, there is no correct way of answering this question. It is in the eye of the beholder on which people believe is the better version, the better adaptation of the books. I do have my own opinion on both of them. Both have their positive and negatives in my eyes. But that's also a fundamental issue that we as audience members have. We always want to compare the adaptation back to where it came from. And that's only natural, as fans of the books want to see how something is taken from a story that they fell in love with. I remember that for the longest time I criticized the Harry Potter films for not doing certain things found in the book. Heck, I still do, to be honest with you. But what I do now is what this channel is all about. I imagine how someone else could take this story and rework it in a new way. How could somebody take someone else's idea that was perhaps workshopped to become a film, already has become a film, is planning on being a TV show, already has been a TV show? How can someone reimagine them so that certain elements maybe hit a little bit more poignantly? And that's how we should look at both adaptations of a series of unfortunate events. Neither one of them are perfect. Neither of them will ever be, and that's okay. We have a version that tries to stay true to the novels and can sometimes stumble and slow down at times, and a version that restructures how the events were presented that speeds through details perhaps a little too quickly. They both have their ups and their downs, but what we have is a story that, as unfortunate as it might be, has a series and giant collection of fans who will always return to what we have and await to what will come. We could talk endlessly about the ideas that could be presented, and perhaps we will even think of ways that we could better imagine how this story can be presented. But unfortunately, for myself, and perhaps to you, that's not how this video goes. Alright, we're back in the swing of things, everybody. Thank you for watching this episode of Story Surgery, where I talk about a series of unfortunate events. Wow. It's been a little bit since I've been able to do anything, apart from the update that I did last month, but hey, I was able to get everything all squared away and figured out, so we're back in the swing of things. Small little update to a couple of things that I mentioned from June's update. The Discord server is going well. I'm getting everything all situated and sorted out with that. I have another couple of things that I'm currently testing and detailing and kind of debugging, if you will, when it comes to doing live streaming stuff over on Twitch. I got a couple of people who have already started to pitch ideas to me when it comes to collaboration videos, and I'm doing my best to make sure that I'm going to try to keep to a more stern scheduling from here on out. After everything that went down with my computer and whatnot, and being on this dry spell of not making any content for the channel, I really wanted to make sure that I forced myself to really go to a schedule so that way I'm always keeping that story muscle always worked at. I'd never want to lose the ability to keep making what I'm loving doing with this. But apart from that, thank you all very much for watching. My name is EPZ379, and I'll see you for the next operation.